kind of protection is also a political issue that without religious institutional intervention, we can make this political issue in the first place. So lastly, about how unnecessary intervention can be expected. We think when taxing some institutions, state has many chances to intervene into this institution. Why is that? Because when taxing, we have to check the process of how much money is used and how much money is like taxed or so forth. However, it is very possible that these people in religious organization in charge of taxation make mistakes. For example, do not clarify the usage of certain money that is provided by the government. In that case, state has a chance to intervene into this institution, saying that if you do not do not actually put off these religious issues from politics, I'm going to actually make your institution illegal because you are not paying tax back to the state. We think in this situation, unnecessary intervention by state is being conducted because, for example, if Democratic government want to exclude religious institutions from politics, they can actually give a threat to the religious institution by saying, I'm going to make your institution illegal because you are not paying tax properly. Within this process of checking how much money is given paid back to the government is very difficult issue. There always can be a chance for mistake of this religious institution to check these kind of things. Therefore, state has every single chance to actually intervene into state religious institutions so that religious institution cannot fight against the state in the first place. Therefore, in order for us to be able to avoid this unnecessary intervention from the state, we should not take this proposal. So, Mr. Speaker, this debate is about whether economic they have to show us why economic rights is so important that religious institution rights can be compromised. They did not show that, therefore, we're very proud to vote this motion. Thank you.
I thank the member of opposition for his remarks. I would like to call upon government whip to continue the case. Please deliver the speech within 7 minutes here.
The fundamental problem coming from side opposition in today's debate is the fact that they're confusing paying tax with its true purpose, because they think that it only embodies the economic obligation that citizens have to its country, but that's not just it. What we're trying to prove to you in today's debate is that paying tax legitimizes certain acts of people who would like to push forth a political cause. Because we think that the freedom to express your religious preferences mean nothing if those freedom cannot affect actual changes. What we're putting forth to you in today's debate is that legitimizing those sorts of religious choices is something that needs to be done and lacks in the status quo, which is why the motion is necessary in order to achieve the purpose that side opposition has proposed to us in the beginning of this debate anyway. Now, I'd like to start by making a few rebuttals. Firstly, he talked about how these religious institutions don't have enough pressure to put all these agendas into the political atmosphere anyway. We respond by saying that under the status quo that you're advocating, that's what's happening right now. So we're asking you, how would you increase the pressure of these religious institutions without doing anything? What we're proposing from our side is that if that pressure is actually not enough to put these agendas into politics, let's legitimize these religious institutions so that their agendas become something that's somewhat more acceptable, right? Because we talk about politicians and people treating issues of Scientology as jokes. We think that stems from the fact that these people don't own a sense of stakeholderness within the community, and that's something that can be fixed by pursuing the motion. Now, second rebuttal, right? On the concept of how the intervention of the state would be more likely, it's possible already in the status quo, and that's something that's okay, right? We think that the concept that banning all these things altogether is something that is very ridiculous, right? Because when there are so many different types of minorities and different groups of religions, you are unable to do it all together. If you ban them altogether, the status that we see right now is you radicalize these groups and you make them even more irrational in their no thank you, their preferences and their application of ideas, we think that that's something that needs to be considered and but thus must follow the motion.
Why?
Yes.
Why state is in a position to judge this region is extreme and have to be changed and change the nature of region? Why state has right to do so?
We don't think the state has the right to do so. What we simply say is that these religious institutions need to be able to, given the proper platform, not to completely implement certain social causes, but to advocate strongly for them. We think that right now these advocations that happen have several implications, and we think a prong needs to be added in the consideration process of whether or not a religious institution would like to follow those causes and values at the end of the day, and that's something that side opposition cannot provide. Now, moving on to my first flashpoint on religious institutions' right to the freedom of pursuit of certain political ideals, right? Because first of all, we've told you that this freedom doesn't mean anything if at the end of the day, it doesn't affect actual changes, right? Because we think that this freedom, we think that this freedom can be achieved if these people are legitimized more in the eye of society, and that's something that we think can be done through tax. And with that in itself, the concept of right is enhanced, right? Because at the end of the day, if these people are able to pursue certain applications of ideas, but at the end of the day, they can't actually pull through and finish those sorts of concepts, that's something that we don't think is necessarily okay, right? Because we think that much like corporations, these religious institutions depend on the structure that a government is able to provide. Much like a corporation depends on infrastructure like roads and trains, these religious institutions depend on the jurisprudence structure that a government provides in order to push forth the political ideals and make those ideas become reality, right? Talked about imposing certain laws or certain things that they think embody their religions better, and that is why we think that it's important for them to offer a certain sense of exchange between community and between themselves and the state. Because as we have said, when these policies are implemented, not everyone is going to be very happy with it. That is why there needs to be a certain sense of compensation through taxes in terms of people who don't agree with it. This is the exchange we're making in order for you to accept the ideas that we're trying to propose in today's debate, right? Now, we also consider cases in which these religious marches are too radical, right? We think that we need to add a certain sense of deterrence and more consideration in those aspects as well. Now, to my second clash point on this, the whole sphere of backlashes on the public atmosphere, right? Because first of all, they talked about how influencing change always comes with controversy, but under their case, they haven't proven to us how they're going to solve the problem that they proposed in today's debate, right? Because we think that strong collective advocation on a massive scale is very different from interpersonal interactions that occur, right? That is why this has to be added in addition to personal taxes, because you're not simply conveying ideas, talking to a certain person. You're doing this on a massive scale, where you're sometimes mobilizing people to pursue certain causes. When you're strongly advocating your disciples to sign a certain petition to pass a certain act, we think that at the end of the day is something that needs to be considered very seriously, and thus we need to follow the motion. Because these backlashes can be minimized if at the end of the day there's a much more sense of trust and much more sense of credibility added to these religious institutions. No, thank you. Now, my last clash point is on the concept of the inner workings and the effectiveness of this process, right? Because they question us that what about the minorities of religious institutions, how would they afford it? First of all, we think that's a complete mischaracterization of these religious institutions in the first place. We think that oftentimes they're very wealthy because they have a lot of support from people surrounding them at the end of the day. And we also say that even if they don't have the wealth to support these sorts of things, of course these taxes are going to be proportionate to the size of those religious institutions at the end of the day. We think that it's important to add a prong of consideration in order for these religious institutions to pursue a certain cause. Because in the status quo, that's lacking, right? We think that religious institutions are more rash and more quick at reaching a goal that they're trying to achieve. And we think that it's very dangerous because the implications of these things are not very minimal, right? Because when we talk about religious institutions having the right to come out and mobilize people people to pursue a certain cause, we think that adds cost not only to the society, Mr. Chair, but also to these religious institutions' credibility themselves. And if you would like to establish this freedom, this full freedom for people to be able to have these religious institutions as spiritual guidance and spiritual structure, that's something that we need to consider. And thus, I proudly beg to propose. Thank you very much.
I thank Governor Whip for her remarks. The electoral opposition whip, you continue the case, please, please,
Government side conceded the fact that if you take this policy, religious institution somehow starts to be moderate compared with our paradigm. We oppose that state because the religion is an important factor which creates your own identity, your own ethnicity, which is directly connected to yourself. They haven't shown why taxing the right to freedom, the right to religion can be justified on their side of the house. We oppose that concept because they are directly, not directly, but in fact, directly trying to tax the right to religion of those people. And we say the religion changes, of course we accept. But there's some religions, minority religions or conservative religions that do not want to change, that just want to exercise your rituals, that wants to also affect politics so that they won't be exterminated by the majority's tyranny. They haven't shown why after taxing those religious institutions, still those religious institutions remain under their paradigm. We say to protect the important rights for individuals and religious institutions look for or pursue your own religious freedom, we mustn't take this policy. I'm going to ask 3 questions in my speech. Firstly, what's it that government side wants to tax in the first place? Secondly, whether religion can be better or not on their paradigm. But lastly, whether state intervention benefits them or not. But before that, one point we brought out to the previous speaker. So, main contention, especially from the government way, is if we take this policy, people suddenly start to accept those people because they feel satisfied they are paying tax. That's fine. No, Mr. Speaker, people won't consider when you talk about something that that person is paying tax or not. If that's the case, according to the logic, economic entity is always superior to any other things because they are paying more and more tax. No, thank you, compare with that person. We don't think that kind of thing is important or relevant to display in the first place. But moreover, we say, after taking this policy, because of the deterrence power as they conceded, it is difficult for the religious institution to participate in the politics. They said, they start to select the issues which they really think is important. But we think that deterrence power or that hesitation is quite damaging because there are also counter powers to counter that person and to influence the politicians, influence the politics in a better method. You have to pay money constantly so that you won't be exterminated by the other side. But they makes it impossible for these institutions to do it because they have to select their issues. But we think in the process of selection, their voices can be much less and weaker, and we think that state is quite bad. So let's move to our question. Firstly, what if the government side wants to tax in the first place? We heard from the Prime Minister that we are taxing things which using infrastructure, but it's simply because they have to compensate for the use of that infrastructure. So we couldn't hear any logical linkage why using infrastructure, why using affecting others means we have to pay tax in the first place. We deny that contention, especially in the uniqueness of religion, because economic issue and religious issue is totally different. Only response from the side of the house is it's up to the citizens. If that's the case, why state court, why lots of decisions made by the government or courts are mostly prioritizing right to religion? Even though it can be discriminative to respect or prioritize right to religion or religion's religious belief, we still allow it simply because compared with economic rights, we think religious right is more important and more inherent, more connected with yourself or your identity for individuals. And what the side of the house wants to tax is not that compensation, but we say they are trying to tax the right to religion itself. It's simply because economic issues or those things are already come up. Without the help of the institution or companies, it's easy for the state to come up with those issues, or it's easy for everyone inside the world to come up with those issues. But religious issues, especially for minority, especially for people who are discriminated, like Muslim, low engagement, or those people, we think their voices cannot be popped out on the side of the house or on their side of the house. To make it agenda, we say we need more and more help, no thank you, and to achieve that goal itself is a right to religion for these people, and it creates the protection of right to religion, and they are trying to extinguish those important rights. Second case, whether religion can be better or not on their side of the house. So they said they can be saved, no thank you, through the tax, which tax can be allocated for these people well. First of all, we can't guarantee whether it can be allocated in that manner. Of course, it can have the welfare system can be better, but it doesn't mean we can use it for example, create a better abortion system or not. But moreover, the important point here is certain minority religious institution loses its own power to point out or to want for your protection because majority people won't have incentive to listen to it in the first place, and minority institution loses some power to utilize or effect the politicians in the first place. We don't think that kind of taxation is true in the first place. Second case, we got yeah.
Okay, if you truly believe that rights to religion is ultimate and is the highest, why would you allow a religion to affect a political change that would affect other religious beliefs?
No. We're talking about a situation. Of course, we accept that certain types of religion can be influenced in some occasions. But the important point here is, especially for the minority people, especially for the weaker religions, they can lose its own power to affect the politics in the first place. It just equals to the deprivation of right to religion. We don't think that is relevant to this debate. Secondly, they say they start to stay moderate because firstly they have to reconsider whether it's important or not, or they start to feel the sense of responsibility. As I talked to you in my first rebuttal, you have to use the money constantly, and of course other counterparty usage, you have to use that money so more and more. But it's impossible for you to do it if the tax is that high, and we moreover say